Good evening. My name is Joshua Duke, and this is for the case assignment in Module 4 of MGT407. And the question on the table is about conflict resolution. The case assignment is an employer asked me to tell him about a time I've been in a conflict with another, and what I did, and how we got past it. First of all, I'd like to say that if you're employed or if you've ever been through high school or public schools, you've been in conflict with another person. It's a part of life, and it's one of those things you either get better at or you don't. I am choosing to tell you about a time that I did not excel at conflict resolution. But this was also around the time that I had just started college. And shortly after the conflict, I was introduced into several concepts regarding emotional intelligence and transactional analysis. And since that conflict was fresh on my mind, I was able to look back and take the concepts that college had taught me and learn a great deal about conflict resolution and conflict management just from that one failure, because failure is quite often the best teacher. So the conflict, I'm in the Air Force, I'm in maintenance, and we have to adhere to a flying schedule. When we don't, we collect deviations. These deviations are very specifically coded in order to really get a point on where the shortfall lied. The individual who was debriefing the aircraft is also responsible for coding the aircraft deviation, if there was a deviation. Me and him had disagreed on a deviation previously, and I showed him in the AFI where he was wrong. Easy. There was no argument. And everything went on fine. About 3 weeks later, the same deviation occurred again on a separate flight. This time he came out with the AFI in hand, and his boss came out behind him, and his boss came into my office with him, and his boss stood against the wall with his arms folded and looked right at me, watching me, waiting. And this kind of put me on defensive. Reading his signs, his overt signs. It might have been covert to him, but they were overt to me. And we talked about the same deviation again, and I again told him that this is the way it should be coded. And he said, well, I think you're wrong. I said, that's fine. Let me show you in the AFI. And we showed it. And it ended up being a disagreement on the wording of the regulation and the rules that govern this deviation. And when I still disagreed, I told him that, I've encountered this before. I have written a report on this at my last assignment, at my last organization. And the boss immediately stepped in. Visually, he was angry, he was aggressive. It put me on defense. And he proceeded not to necessarily attack my findings or my stance, but to attack me, saying that he's been doing this for 15 years. I don't know what I'm talking about. How dare I try to change the way they do business or mistreat his guys. Of course, I have no idea what he's talking about, but I'm offended, and we go back and forth. At the same time, our bosses walk by, our supervisors, direct supervisors walk by, and he says, sir, we need you out here. Me and him are having a disagreement. So now he's berating me in front of my bosses, and this is in front of our bosses, the worst possible scenario. We're going back and forth, and finally I realize this is going nowhere. And I said, this isn't getting us anywhere. We're no closer to solving the issue at hand. And I think we had two very different ideas of what the issue was. Mine was the deviation. His was me disagreeing with them. But I said, give me 24 hours and I'll find you the regulation that says plain as day, black and white, that this is what we're supposed to do. Regardless of whether I'm right or wrong, it doesn't matter. I will find it in black and white. And we'll press with pride and move on with life. And we agreed. And the next day we came in and I said, look, here it is. Here's the regulation. It was actually a subsection not attached to the regulation that he was going off of. But you had to go to a different website and find it. And once I showed him, before I showed him, I said, look, we're not going to argue about this. I'm just here to give you this. I want to apologize for any misunderstandings that were created, but this is how it goes. And we agreed, and we've been professional in our relationship ever since. I don't say cordial, but we've been professional. Now I want to go back and touch on a few things and highlight some concepts that I've learned about conflict management and conflict resolution. And I spoke about them or referenced them earlier, and that's emotional intelligence and transactional analysis. Now, emotional intelligence is also known as EQ. Just as IQ is intelligence quotient, there's also EQ, which is emotional quotient. And emotional intelligence is how well we can manage and have a sense of self-awareness of our own emotions. And it helps us to be better communicators. It helps us to, when inputs come in, adjust, understand how they're making us feel, but then stay calm, keep level-headed, and it helps us communicate better. It also helps us to be able to have empathy with whoever's talking to us. And these are all great tools for in conflict management to hopefully avoid conflict altogether. But when you can raise your EQ, when you have your emotional intelligence up there where it needs to be, your knowledge improves, your attitude improves, behavior improves. You can build stronger relationships with others because you never get frazzled. There's also a greater sense of less stress, less anxiety. You're overall healthier when you're in control of your emotions. And for transactional analysis is the concept that everybody, when communicating either overtly or covertly, is operating from one of three ego states. And that is the parent ego state, the child ego state, or what everybody should be operating from, the adult ego state. Now, a parent, somebody who's operating from the parent ego state, is oftentimes very critical, very harsh, very disciplining, and that can often put somebody into, maybe they were operating in a parent state, an adult state, but if somebody becomes very critical of you, it can put you in a child ego state, specifically a rebellious child ego state. If you think back to when your parents tried to tell you to do something that you didn't want to do, and they said, well, I don't care if you don't like it, that's what you have to do. Maybe they said that, maybe they didn't. But it immediately raised in you a little rebellion. So I'm not going to do that just because he said to do it. That's critical parent and rebellious child ego states conflicting. Now, you can go back and forth between these states. However, you want to operate from the adult ego state. Now, the adult ego state, you're very level-headed, you're very calm. That's where difficult conversations take place. That's where conflict resolution takes place. Problem solving takes place. You can gather feedback from somebody and really absorb it instead of letting it go in one ear and out the other like a child would from a critical parent. But also, when it doesn't just help you receive the feedback, it helps you give the feedback if you're in the adult ego state. And these are the states that one should be in, especially in the workplace. Now, in relation to the story, when the debriefer's boss walked in, transactionally, he was communicating covertly his intentions. He was standing just like this. And I said I was put on the defensive. And I should have known the signs, because when I was on the defensive, immediately my emotions started running high. I saw the conflict coming. And emotionally, I was preparing myself for a fight when I should have been preparing myself to de-escalate the situation. When I see it coming, I know the steps that I'm going to take. Transactionally, his first words out of his mouth were very critical. And as soon as they were critical, they put me in the child ego state. I wasn't prepared to relinquish it just because, or relinquish my position solely because of the way he was being critical to me. If he'd have come up to me with an adult ego state, said, look, I'm reading this in the AFI. This is how I understand it. Do you understand it differently, or do you know somewhere else that it's written that maybe paints a clearer picture? That is the difference between the adult ego state and the parent and child ego states that him and I were operating out of. So looking back, after going to college and everything, I look back on this conflict, and I kind of kicked myself in the butt. But I did learn invaluable lessons. I've had several conflicts since then where I try to operate from the adult ego state. I can see it coming. And that's, I want to say 95% of the battle is seeing when a conflict is coming, using your emotional intelligence to be not only aware of your own emotions, but how other people's emotions are rising and falling. Being aware of the transaction, just the communication between two people, not just the overt signs, but the covert signs as well. How their body language, are they up, straight ahead? Are they focused? Are they down? Are their shoulders forward? Are they not very attentive? Are their arms crossed? Are their lips pursed? Are their eyes narrowed? These are all things that one should take into account before they react. You might need to de-escalate the situation before you answer their question. You might be able to de-escalate the situation while you answer their question. But it all revolves around being able to control your emotions, control the way you communicate, and thereby setting the example and hopefully de-escalating the situation and control the way they can communicate back. But thank you very much. Have a good day.